of all, welcome everyone. I hope that people are well. I hope that people are healthy. And I thank you all for joining us. Buenas tardes y bienvenidos. First, I want to tell you a little bit about Audubon Naturalist Society. And one of the exciting things about tonight is that Felípe, of course, has a national presence, and we have people from all over the country who have joined us tonight. So welcome. Audubon Naturalist Society is a Washington, D.C. region-based organization. And we've been serving this region for 123 years. We're the oldest independent environmental organization in the area. We are an independent organization. We're not affiliated with National Audubon Society, except by a shared history of inspiration. And we have very extensive environmental education programs for adults and children. We have a conservation program, which works on policy, advocacy, and citizen or community science, which we'll talk more about why I use those two terms later. And we have 2 sanctuaries that we own and operate, and one which we are working on an extensive restoration program to rehabilitate its forest. We also do some really exciting events and activities with our community. And I'm going to introduce them now because they're relevant to some of the conversation that Felípe and I are likely to have later, which is that since 2016, we've been running some conferences that have grown larger and larger. One is called Taking Nature Black, and one is called Naturally Latinos. And they attract a local to the region audience of African-American environmentalists or Latino environmentalists, respectively, or in many cases, of course, together. And it's through our work with Naturally Latinos Conference, which I co-chair, along with my partner in crime, Serena Linares, who's on the call as well tonight, that I first met Felípe. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but I just wanted to share that in our background around Audubon Naturalist Society, which we call ANS. And I'm the director of our conservation program, Eliza Cava. So welcome again. The conservation cafes are typically something that we have done in person, usually at our Wood End headquarters. Oh, and I'm going to introduce somebody else to you. I'm sorry. I'm going to introduce Melanie Quiñones from Puerto Rico. And she put in a chat in the box, which reminded me. She's a master's student at Cornell University, and in the Civic Ecology Lab, and she's a major contributor to the citizen science program of El Yunque National Forest. And she'll be joining us as a panelist to speak about that work in partnership with Corazón Latino. So I'm really excited that Melanie is able to join us from her home in Puerto Rico. So about the cafes. The cafes is a concept that we've been doing for the last several years, usually at our headquarters in Chevy Chase at Wood End Nature Sanctuary, Chevy Chase, Maryland. And people come in person. We get 30 to 40 people in our great hall, and we have fantastic local conservationists. Many, like Felípe, are national figures, but they live and work in the DC area, and so we're lucky enough to be able to have them come and speak to us in person. Since, of course, everything has changed now, this is now our 3rd conservation cafe to be entirely online, and it's created a situation where we're reaching more people than we have before. And that's really exciting for us. It's exciting that these kind of intimate events still have a sense of intimacy because of how dynamic our speakers are, but that now you can join, and you may not have been able to in the past. So I think the volunteers and the staff as well who have made this possible, and a big thank you to Felípe. And I want to thank everybody for taking this time on what, at least in the DC region, is a beautiful evening to join us, and especially during this challenging time. We'll be recording this event. We'll be circulating the link to everyone who's on the call, all registered attendees, as soon as possible afterwards, at some point next week, I anticipate. And we really thank you for your donations at any level that make this event possible. We will continue to ask for donations for about 2 weeks post the event for anyone who wants to view the recording within that time period. And after 2 weeks, we'll make it available freely to everyone on YouTube, on our blog, and through social media. And Corazón Latino and Felípe, I know, will be sharing it as well after that. So at that point, about a week after it gets fully processed, it'll be available for everyone. With that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Felípe, and I'm going to tell you just a sampling of his biography because he has a really extensive biography, which I have read, but I want to really start by telling you a little bit about how I have gotten to know Felípe, which is through our Naturally Latinos conferences. We invited Felípe to participate on a panel to talk about Latino engagement in politics and policy, and which I moderated at last year's 2019 Naturally Latinos Conference. And it was so fun to get to speak with him. He's so smart. He's so hyper aware of the ways in which we operate within society. And you'll see what I mean when he shows you some slides, for example, that he showed at Naturally Latinos, about the ways in which Latinos engage in the environment different from how mainstream white communities do. And he really shared some he was able to boil down some complex cultural lessons for us in ways that every single person in the audience went, aha, I understand that quickly and easily. And I say that personal story because it, of course, is reflected by his background, which is that he has a really extensive background in mass media communications and marketing through his work with United Way Worldwide, Fenton Communications, and Ogilvy Public Relations. So he's done a lot of work on advocacy campaigns worldwide with outreach strategies and marketing, from protecting the rights of indigenous groups in the Amazon, to fighting climate change, to helping the rights of immigrants in the United States. And he's been with Corazón Latino, which is headquartered in the Washington, D.C. area and does programming in our area, but also nationwide and in Puerto Rico. And Corazón Latino seeks to generate social, environmental, and conservation initiatives that foster natural resource stewardship by mobilizing the love, passion, unity, solidarity, and resources of everyone to advance the common good. And we've been really fortunate to be growing our partnership with Corazón Latino over the last few years. And one of Felipe's colleagues, Abel Olivo, serves on our board at Audubon Naturalist Society as well. So we've been, it's been a wonderful partnership that we've been building and growing. And I want to really give my personal appreciation to Felípe for joining us tonight. He was invited to this talk by my colleague Serenela on a mountain in El Yunque when she was home for her January vacation. And as far as I can tell, and I'm not going to ask her to correct me live, but maybe she'd like to in the chat box, she ran into him in the forest. Was the way I understood it. And she said, Felípe, we'd love it if you would come and speak at Conservation Café. And I was able to follow up, and here we are. So with that, I will turn it over to Felípe and ask him to begin by introducing himself, and then I'll start asking him questions as we go.
Well, Eliza, I need to, you have to send me that invoice because all the good stuff that you said about me, I just need to like cover your expense. No, I'm just kidding. I mean,
it's recorded.
Thank you very much. It is, you were so kind in your words. I'm very happy to be here. I am, I do have an extensive experience, but mostly because I'm a very, and Melanie helped me, so I'm muy inquieto, I'm very restless. I'm always finding for the next thing to do. And part of that is how Corazón Latino was born, and part of that is how we end up doing crazy things, innovative things. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but it is part of my nature, and I really appreciate your words. I really want to thank you, Serenela, Denise, the ANS for having us, for having Melanie too. And yes, I agree. It's been an exciting time since we first crossed paths during that conference. I also Serenela and I became friends in Facebook, and when she was announcing that, hey, anything cool that I could do, but when I'm back home, I said like, well, you want to go to the Yunque? Here's we have the hookup. So she immediately got in touch with Amigos del Yunque, which is our partner there on the ground, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And she ended up, I think, having a good Saturday morning, measuring trees and contributing to citizen science and the understanding of El Yunque. Just a little bit additional of what you just said, Eliza, I'm an immigrant. I'm a proud immigrant from Mexico. I'm also a proud US citizen. I'm a dad, and I just enjoy serving and finding opportunities to serve Latino underserved communities, and I hope that passion, that enjoyment translates into our work. I don't know what else to say, but yeah, I think you covered. And if anybody has any questions or any further comments, my bio is there, and you can read it. But I mean, the important thing is where we are now and what we want to do. And I do have an El Yunque t-shirt, so if you can see it. Not that I'm not dressing properly for a presentation. I just wanted to like make a shameless plug about El Yunque. So anyhow, I just wanted to get it out of the. I don't know, Eliza. Any other question? Any other thing that you may want to ask on my background. I also want Melanie to introduce herself. I think it will be, I mean, we'll bring her during parts of the conversation, but I think it will be good for her to say. She's a very talented and a young professional that I really admire and I really respect because, and you'll see why, but Melanie.
Hello, everyone. Felipe, gracias. And thank you to this society. I'm really excited. Felipe, you know, just called me and told me, hey, you should really join this conversation. Like, we want to discuss about Yunque and the things that we have, you know, accomplished through this process. And I'm like, I'm in. Right now, I am a master's student at Cornell University, but before that, I was working in El Yunque, and that's how I met Felipe. I just literally went to DC and say, hey, I need you. Can you help us with this citizen science program? And Felipe was just like, yeah, let's do it. Let's work together. So I think that opportunity to just really be very flexible and have this really good connection help us on really designing a good program that is very strong in the social aspect and really emphasize on how you connect with people. So that's really important for us, not only the science, but also how you interact with people. And yeah, Felipe, do you want to start somehow our conversation? What do you want to tell us? What story do you want to start with?
Let's start with, let Eliza drive us through this. But anyhow, Eliza, I don't know if there's anything else you want us or any comment on my background. Again, I can spend an hour just telling you my story, which is, I think it's kind of cool, but this is not what I
my background, I didn't expand a little bit, but I graduated from the University of Puerto Rico. I have a bachelor in science in environmental sciences. And the majority of my work when I was an undergrad, it was more about, you know, tropical ecology. I traveled a lot to work in Hawaii, Belize, United States with the Forest Service. So I have this very strong background, but always connected to the social area. And so working with the Forest Service, I made this transition and then decided that I wanted to go to more the social ecological aspects of different programs in science. So that's how I entered through my new career, which I'm doing a master's now in Cornell University in the Natural Resources Department, which is really focused on community-based natural resources management. And so part of my research project really quickly would be in communities surrounding the forest and El Yunque, and just understanding what are those social ecological values that, you know, help federal agencies to do better work on the ground. So that's more in my background, so you can have that on the table. Now, Felipe, well,
I have a question for both of you. Two parts. The first is, Felipe, can you tell a little bit more about Corazón Latino and the ways in which you do your work? And the reason it's two-part is because you both really brought up the federal role. And so before we get into working with communities, what I want to know is, why have you both emphasized the role of the federal agencies like the Forest Service? So I know that's part of the Corazón Latino question because of how extensive the Corazón Latino partnerships are, but I think you could each answer it in your own way.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me actually I want to start with the slide that you referred to, Eliza, because I do have it ready. So give me one second, because that tells a little bit the story of what we do. So bear with me, everybody. I think it's now showing. Let me do it properly. There we go.
Perfect.
All right. This is the slide that Eliza was referring to that presented or developed or put together a year ago, or a little bit more than a year ago, where this is one of the premises of why Corazón Latino was born. And as you mentioned, Eliza, in your introduction, we need to understand and we need to recognize more to understand. And it's recognized that communities, white communities, or what I would call mainstream communities, enjoy nature in a different way than Latinos and other communities of color. And there's no right or wrong answer. There's no right or wrong way of doing it, it's just different. So when you try to fit the way one community enjoys nature or the outdoors in the model that the other community on those tribes, there's going to be a disconnect. So what we've seen throughout our I mean, as being being an outdoor enthusiast, it was that there was not a lot. Not saying that that doesn't exist, because there's a lot of groups that have done it before us and they have done very, very amazing job. But there was not a general offering of culturally relevant experiences for communities of color and for Latino communities, which is the one that we focus most. So what does that mean? So if you think about, let's say let's put it in another geography, in Colorado, or maybe in Wyoming, or maybe in Utah, where there's an important Latino community, where there's outing experiences, you probably would be, I mean, it would be reasonable to think that it will be on a Saturday morning. Maybe could be a trek or whatever. I mean, within the varieties of activities that can happen. So if you have families or members of a community that work on Saturdays, well, you're excluding them by default. So the first thing we want to consider is, when is the right time to engage them? When is the right time to organize an event? We came early on in the conclusion that we need to do it on Sundays, but Sundays, because it's more common that especially those families and members of a community that work in the service industry, that they will have Sunday off, Sunday and Monday, or a combination of those. But you don't want to do it on Sunday at noon, because then you're competing with God, and that's not going to end well for you. So you have to. So we started testing, and we started creating programming that it was on Sunday afternoons. Well, what does that mean? That if a family is coming directly from church or after church or whatever activities they decide to do, well, first of all, they're going to be still probably on their church clothes, so they will be kind of formal. When they bring the family, it's not only mom, dad, or mom, dad, and the kids. No, they're going to bring the whole family. They're going to bring the grandparents. They're going to bring the tios, the uncles, the aunt, even the vecina, even the neighbor that they consider part of the family. So if you organize events that only cater or only are focused on specific age groups, again, you're not going to create an experience that it's relevant and it's welcoming to them. So we started testing, as I was saying, do it on Sundays, Sunday afternoons. So we want to have activities for small, from the toddlers all the way to the grandparents, and everybody in between. So you want something for the younger, for the teenagers, for the older, for the adults. And also, even though it will be normal to think that it will be in Spanish, but not everybody within the Latino community may prefer it. The smaller kid, like my son Alejandro, he will prefer it in English, and he will want to listen to instructions or the activities conducted in English. So you have to have that flexibility in terms of language, in terms of activities, in terms of the time. And then on top of that, if you're doing an event at 3 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon, well, you kind of get hungry, so you have to have food. And food is another element that's not only for Latino Americans. I think it's for every community and for every human being, brings people together. So what we do in our events is we bring, again, we try to figure out, and it may be, each community will be different. So for example, in Puerto Rico, that doesn't necessarily apply. A Saturday morning makes a lot of sense to have it. But again, it depends on your local, on the local composition of your community. So we do it. So we started doing events in the afternoons. We started doing events that offer food, that offer activities for everybody. And since this funding, we started doing the work with seed funding from the U.S. Forest Service as part of their mandate to offer programming services and offerings to every person in this country, regardless of their language, regardless of age. We got funding initially from conservation education, but then it started the conservation education area, but also expanded to forest health protection, civil rights division, and then some of the units have been engaging with us, like the Yunque National Forest. So for us, it was a way using taxpayers' resources to to fulfill this responsibility, this mandate that the Forest Service has. So we want to make sure that, and it's a notion of public lands, of we all have the right to enjoy them, but we also have the responsibility to care for them. So it's not just that we do a fun stuff and go out and have food in a public land, whether it's a park or a national forest or a reserve. It is also fulfilling that mission from the Forest Service and other agencies and other organizations that they continue to fund our work. We are actually very blessed that we just we're signing just starting a new agreement with the National Park Service to support the Chesapeake Bay area, so the watershed. So it's going to be an exciting project. So that's what we do. It's about creating opportunities. It's about bringing down barriers, which can be language, can be access, many barriers that prevent Latino communities to enjoy nature. So so that's where we were born. And we mentioned a lot of the federal agencies because we've been a partner, an instrumental part of finding ways to engage in a meaningful way, and again, in a culturally relevant and linguistically appropriate way with Latino communities. And we've been very blessed to have that opportunity. And again, because we are working with federal agencies, federal government, our work needs to be open, needs to be available. So we are always happy to share our best practices, our know-how, our expertise, because that's the mission and that's how we want to do. And there's no one organization that can solve everybody's problems. So we're happy to always partner. And that shows in our partners. And I want to show you very quickly. This is our partners. This is a list of, and it's not a comprehensive, this is a list of the people that, of the organizations in DC, in Puerto Rico, in other parts of the country that we partner. And we also do a lot of international work through partners. So that's part of our DNA. Melanie, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you, Felipe. And to add what you were saying, actually, in answering your question, Eliza, the reason and why I also mentioned the role of the federal government in all this process of community engagement, first telling the story from their side of why it is important connecting with communities. El Yunque National Forest that we are talking today and discussing is a federal land. So because of that, the Forest Service is in charge of the administrative part and also the research, everything that is related to the forest in charge. But when you take that and you also think about their economic structure and the resources, and you put it in a broader context in terms of, the land management plan and everything, they now are changing their structure of having more a plan that was more focused on recreation and putting a plan that is more focused on community engagement. And the reason why they're doing this, because communities that surround the forest, they really wanted to have access, not only access to the forest, but access to information, access to resources. So the Forest Service recognized that they really need to promote a stronger regional identity. And throughout the plan, they encourage and they establish that they really want to create these connections. But to do that, you need people that help you to create those connections. And so that's why we came out also with the Citizen Science Program, but that's how Corazón Latino comes to the idea of, well, we actually need people that support us in that social area that help us connect, because the capacity of the employees and the forest to engage in all those communities is really hard. You don't have a lot of people. So having another organization like Corazón Latino that helps to connect that part, as Felipe is saying, the structure and the social component of the Latino community is really helpful, because you're giving that special treat, I will say, to the people to understand them, not only use them in that way. So that's basically why we talked a lot about the Forest Service, because it's just from their side, it is really important to connect with communities. But in the other side, if you think about then communities that surround the forest and the Latinos communities, they really need and to feel empowered to really protect their land and to feel heard. So that's why Corazón Latino somehow connecting we want to provide that voice for the people to actually feel encouraged to do, co-management, share stewardship practices, just having the opportunity to work in their land and collaborating with a federal agency that is super powerful and have a lot of land across their houses, basically. So.
And let me build on what Melanie just said, because I think it's very important. And early on, when we were starting to develop this partnership with the Forest Service, I had a really interesting conversation with, she was a then Director of Conservation Education, Michiko Martin. And she's now acting director or deputy director in recreation. So she mentioned, and she said something that it's always been there on the work that we do, is that the management of public lands, whether it's a forest, a natural reserve, a park, it's one of the most democratic processes by design that exists in our country. Because everybody who's a stakeholder, who benefits, who lives around, or who in a way enjoys these public lands, has the right to be on the table and help make those decisions. And the mechanism, it's the management plans. And by mandate of Congress, each public land, federal public land, needs to do a revision of that plan with the input of everybody who's affected or everybody who enjoys these public lands, part of that process. The problem is that in Puerto Rico might be a different case, but in many parts of the country, you usually have the same people who are conservationists, who have been in this process for a long time, but there's no diversity. And part of our work, or a driver of our work on our partnership, is about that. It's about building civic engagement within Latino communities. As Melanie mentioned and put it beautifully, we are empowering, we are inspiring, we are educating Latino communities to be part of the conservation of the stewardship of the land. And how do we do that? Well, we first show them, we first explain them, we first make them part of the enjoyment of their public lands. And then we go through a process in which all the way can be participating in public comments or even voting. So it is a process, and that's part of it. And I also, you mentioned, Eliza, in the introduction, your kind words, that I have done a lot of work with immigration, or I did work with immigration. And I still do work with immigration reform. I also do work related to civic engagement and getting people to vote, empowering them through the power of the vote. Whether what candidate, it's up to everybody, but it's important is that Latinos show up to vote. So that I bring into the work that we do. So it is part of empowering the Latino community to have them enjoy and care for our public lands.
Well, thank you. And thank you both. I think you really walked us through such a big scale of why it's important that we engage the Latino community in conservation. Why, I mean, one thing that really has struck home to me is that mainstream conservation often approaches communities of color from a deficit model of like, we need to engage you in conservation because you don't know about conservation. And one of the models instead that what you're speaking about brings is every community is part of conservation. Every community is part of nature, and people recognize nature in different ways. So while yes, they may need to learn about what does scientific-based conservation, mean for a federal land. So many communities already have so much love for nature. They might already know a lot about how to identify things in nature. They might know a lot about how to use the resources of nature. And it's just about really connecting those dots around bringing those shared values to the ways in which we manage the resource in a scientific way. So I would like to use that to ask you to share, starting with you, Felípe, and then taking us deep into El Yunque, about your citizen science programs. And you told me that the impetus for Corazón Latino being involved in citizen science in El Yunque actually started with the City Nature Challenge in Washington, D.C. area, which just wrapped up for this year with, I think, what was called the Backyard City Nature Challenge. So maybe you can tell that story of how you started with citizen science and then grew it so quickly, and then take us into El Yunque.
Absolutely. Let me start with one of the comments that you made, which is unfortunately true, that a lot of organizations, it's changing, but a lot of the initial engagement with Latino communities was not so much about because we want to be inclusive. That inclusiveness came because that was the trend. That was what the board decided. That's what their donors were asking. The reality is that Latino communities and many and communities of color, it's part of our DNA to care for nature. We sometimes need to just reconnect. We just sometimes need to turn the switch. So for us, and and there's a lot of research, and I'll be glad to share that. I just don't have it with me right now, but about, I mean, even for climate issues, when we tracked for the past, I don't know, 3 or 4 elections, how climate ranks for Latino communities. And guess what? It's actually sometimes higher than economic stability or immigration. It's sometimes how you frame it. It might be clean water, clean air that ranks higher. And there's other studies that have shown that communities of color, Latino communities, are particularly keen and ready to jump into. Sometimes it's that it is what I mentioned, that you don't create or that organizations don't necessarily create engagement that is culturally relevant and linguistically appropriate. And I insist in this part because it's not only about translation. It's not only about putting out a flyer or trying to do or adding Espanol in your website. No, it's about really making it culturally relevant to really engage and motivate. And then the numbers go up and you get impressive engagement. So yes, back to your question about civic engagement, about citizen science. So it was very interesting because as we were starting as an organization, we do a lot of work still for the Forest Service in the online, and now with COVID, we're back to our origins where we're doing a lot of online engagement. So when we co-manage with the Ad Council a campaign called Descubre el Bosque, in English is Discover the Forest, which basically the idea is to provide Spanish language content, information and motivation to Latino parents to use or to engage in green spaces, even in cities. So if it's a urban forest or just your backyard, as the City Nature Challenge just did it. So that's where we're trying to offer information. And we have, to our knowledge, is the only Spanish language Facebook presence that we have to update it every day and putting out information about engaging with nature. And that's how we got started. But then we started seeing the opportunity to do more on the ground grassroots activities. And the first kind of proposal that we put together was around a program on citizen science that the Forest Service put out. So we said, like, we want to create, I mean, we haven't seen at least in the US, a program that engages Latinos as a primary objective in citizen science. So why don't we start testing, see what best practices work? And that's what we're starting doing the process that I mentioned in my previous intervention, where we started saying, okay, citizen science, well, before we started explaining to them how to do use an app or use a process to collect scientific information, we first need to start breaking some of the barriers, like how to get them out, how to start have them feel welcome in a public land. How do we make sure that they understand that if there's a forest or a park ranger in uniform, that's not something bad or something. I mean, I think that's true for not only Latino communities, but for African American communities. There's a distrust in uniform. So how do we make, like, no, this is part of, there's rules that you need to follow. I mean, there's certain ethics that need to be followed for our public lands, but at the same time, this is for you to enjoy. So we started testing that, and we started to create, I remember the first City Nature Challenge 2 years ago, I can't remember, yeah, 2 years ago. So we did one in Cheverly, Maryland. So You mentioned Abel Olivo. He's a community leader in that area. He's a trusted leader. And said like, well, let's do it in your neck of the woods, see what happens. So we invited the community that lives around a park, a state park. And we, I mean, it was a Sunday cold end of or spring afternoon, and we started doing, with the knowledge that we have acquired through online engagement, we did a lot of Facebook promotion. We did a lot of a traditional organizing method like flyers, talk to communities. So like just invited folks, and we had no idea what to expect. And to our surprise, I think we had probably 30 to 35 people that show up, including a family, a mom and her son that drove all the way from Delaware because they have found it in Facebook. So for like, okay, and because what did she wanted to do? She wanted to show her son learn about citizen science. So that for us was like, wow, we got something here. And then we brought all these elements. As I mentioned, we brought dance, because to break the ice, nothing better than dance. So you probably know that. We brought the food. We've brought the experience. We brought Woodsy Owl, who made it fun. And so we started, so that's how we got started. And suddenly, people started paying attention, and within the Forest Service, like, oh, this guy's got something going on. So another of the Forest Service raised their hands and like, hey, we are starting to have some problems with the emerald ash borer obviously in the East Coast, and there's this particular park, or it's a park in the DC area where it's really bad. So why don't we do an event there, and we can bring some scientists to explain what the process is, and then that event generated twice as many people. And so we started to see that this model of again being inclusive in terms of age, language, and bringing all these elements started to be a very positive, and then it started growing from that. And then as a communicator, one of the things that we do well is communicate. So we started to present these success stories or tests or pilots within the Forest Service, and people started paying attention. And that's how Melanie actually was referred to us by Michelle Tamez, who's like, you guys need to talk to each other because Corazón Latino is doing what you need to do or you are trying to do in El Yunque. So that's how she connected us, and take it from there, Melanie.
So I would like to answer your question first, and then go and take it from there and answer continue Felipe's conversation. You mentioned something really important about how people are part of the conservation process, and they're not excluded, and they should not be excluded of conservation process. Something that for me is really interesting is that people can be part of the conservation process, but sometimes, and that's what I'm saying, sometimes they don't know what kind of capacity they have to an individual and also individual agency to make effective choices when it's related to conservation. So when you think about people really interested in engaging in conservation, but they don't feel comfortable, they just don't feel powerful enough, or they don't know what to do, that's why it is important to federal agencies and other agencies that have a lot of capacity and structure to understand what are these people interested and how you can convert them in opportunities for them to collaborate and contribute in conservation. So I think that's how it came, the idea also with the management planning, connecting with citizen science. We said, citizen science is an opportunity to do, provide information to the people, provide access and experiences that provide them the opportunity to, build themselves more strongly and feel more secure about the information they're providing about the forest to their families, in their workplaces. So just providing that space and experiences that allows people to feel more comfortable in the conservation efforts. And citizen science, the way you call it, citizens in science, you need to have the same weight in terms of how you work with people in the engagement process, but also in the science process. So for me, when we were working in the design process, that was super important, because what I learned and what I read is that sometimes this, you know, the civic engagement, when you're doing citizen science, there's a lack of connection between the people that are actually working in citizen science and the people are participating. So just not using people. It's more about how you can truly create an experience that not only allows us to answer a question, but also that provides people to feel comfortable, to feel that there's a space to have fun, but also to learn. So that's why also we came out with the idea, we need someone that has the capacity out there, an NGO preferably, to help us on how to really engage with people. So that's why we came out with Corazón Latino, because we understood that they had this really strong component of understanding people and just going outside and talking. And you know, how is Felípe and connects and have these crazy ideas. I think we really needed that balance, because we have really strong science-based questions that the forest needs to answer and other organizations needs to answer. So how do you manage the mental health of people? Because it's also important. And you want them to have a great experience, not only just putting data somewhere and measuring trees. So for us, it is really important for people to really engage and feel that they can own the process too. So that's my comment, and that's how we came up with the idea. Let's have two NGOs and one federal agency collaborating for one citizen science program, which is great, because we need to also recognize that not all the agencies and not all organizations are good in, you know, strengths and weaknesses. So if you have someone that is really strong in science, then use that opportunity and collaborate with people that really knows about science. And if you know an organization like Corazón Latino that knows about social, put it together, and with the strong economic opportunity that the federal agencies have, you can have really good experiences and, you know, enhance all the lines of process and design of the citizen.
I think it's important to mention that partner, I mentioned at the beginning, but it's Amigos del Yunque. She's has a very strong tradition, and it's a friends group of El Yunque National Forest. They within their board and their staff, they have very, very respected and very, very achieved scientists that really help design a very strong program to answer the scientific questions. But I remember when I presented this project, when I introduced myself to Dr. Ariel Lugo. For those who know him or have heard of him, he's like an icon within the Forest Service and with the research on tropical forestry. He's the longtime director of the International Institute of Tropical Forestry out in San Juan. So I had to go and pay my respects to him, just to see we are this organization that's going to be doing work in Yunque. When I explained what we do, he looked at me. He's a very serious man, very, very formal. He said, Felípe, Chris, which is the scientific lead in this, Chris Nietzsche, he's gonna make sure that the science is perfect. It's pure. I think that's the word. Que sea pura la ciencia. But that's it. He's not gonna make it fun. He's not gonna make it accessible, and that's where you come in. And I like that combination. So I've been looking very closely on your work. So for me, it was great, because if somebody like Ariel Lugo really sees the value of us participating, that means that my friend Melanie and Pedro Rios, who were the instigators of this, and obviously the whole forest unit that validated and agreed on this approach, was such an important and I mean the project is right now at 80% completion, and obviously COVID has thrown a couple of bumps in the road, but I think we're gonna be very, very successful, and we're gonna both answer the scientific question while creating a meaningful and a community engagement program that it's gonna grow from there, because this is our first step. We're gonna create other community programs supporting citizen science in El Yunque. Go for it, Melanie.
Well, actually, could I interrupt here, because I
Yeah.
would like us to keep talking about engagement strategies, and I have some really specific questions to ask you guys about engagement strategies, but
Sure.
also you promised me beautiful pictures of El Yunque,
We
and
do
so
have,
I would like to show those to the people.
I actually have two
because
things that I wanted to share that I forgot. So give me one quick
I
second.
closed your screen share a while ago. You're going to have to share the screen again because it made your face too small.
No worries. Oh,
And I was just about to talk about the strategies for civic engagement, and adding to Felipe's what he's saying. I mean, community engagement, it takes time. Like, we cannot pretend that connecting with people is just you coordinate a meeting and you're gonna have 100 people in that place and people are going to agree of what you're doing. So that's why I think it's super important to really understand the context of where you're working, and identifying leaders, and just really slowly taking the time to understand the ground you're working with. And I mean, for us, it has been really interesting about how the people from the area has been involved in the citizen science program, because there's a portion of people that are from other sides of the area that are not from the region of the forest, and another portion of residents. So really understanding why those people came there and why it is important, especially the residents that live close to the forest, is super important. But I think mostly is really having a lot of patience in the process and taking time to understand the community you're working with. So just the context and just talking with people and listening is part of the strategic process that I will say that is important. And once you start to really listen to people, you're going to figure out how it creates an opportunity for you to use it as a strategy. And also ask the right questions, I will say, because if you really want to know the people, you need to make really good questions so people can tell you what is their interest, what are the things they care about. So that's the way you immerse yourself in that process. Oh, they care about this, so let's tackle this area that is important. And for us, it has been a challenge. We cannot say it hasn't been a challenge. I mean, we would really love to have more people coming together to this process, but we really need to understand why they're not coming or why they would like to come. So creating that interest is also another picture, just by creating interest in something. So that's what I really wanted to add, that it's challenging, but it's not impossible. So starting with a small group, then you're gonna have a bigger group.
all right, Eliza. So here's a picture of Yunque, and you can see, but I wanted actually to, I realized that I haven't showed, oops, not working. Hold on. I wanted to show you a couple of things on our previous point, just because I forgot that we had these slides. So this was the first citizen science project in Cheverly, Maryland. So this is what I was telling you about the success. Look, we took a picture of iNaturalist. Look, for the first time, we engaged 50 people, 85 different species, and that was our first one. So this was the beginning of I believe our success in this area. Then this is the second one, and I wanted to show this one because it tells you the type of work that we do. So by using iTree, which you're probably familiar, that provides, you put some information about trees, you measure the circumference of the trunk, and you can get some information on the ecological services that tree creates. So we basically show families, kids, their parents, their abuelitos, how to use iTree. And then we obviously created this, like, it gives the information sort of like a USDA, how do you call it, the information sheet or whatever. So we did ahead of time. So this is when we started seeing and we started inspiring kids, their parents, on how to use iNaturalist, iTree. And again, at this point, we were not answering any scientific question. We were just fine-tuning the experience. And my colleague, Chelsea Mervin, she comes from a background of science communications, and her goal and in life is to create more scientists out of small children. So she really enjoys this part, and she really creates these experiences on how to inspire kids to become scientists in the future. So that's also, I just wanted to show this. And here it is, the type of work, and Serenella might bring some memories to Serenella. I mean, you're literally doing it in the middle of the rainforest. And you have to, although it's Puerto Rico warm, you still need to wear long sleeves. You still need to bring closed shoes. You still need to wear pants, because if you don't, you're gonna get beaten. You're gonna get hurt by plants. It is a very interesting experience, and it is a very embracing experience to be in the middle of the forest. We're not in the tourist area, not in the falls or in the tower. No, we are in areas where are not accessible generally to the public. So that creates a very meaningful experience that actually we combine during the process in which, because as Melanie was mentioned, the volunteers that participate need to go through certain training. They need to attend a workshop that it's I think a 4 or 5 hours workshop, and then be ready to go there and participate for 4 to 5 hours on Saturdays or Wednesdays. But we actually incorporate in that process forest bathing, forest therapy for those, because we found that by doing certain invitations, as it's called in the practice, it actually opens people's awareness of nature, and that actually provides them a different experience when they actually go and start measuring trees and doing all this scientific work. So, and I'm sorry I don't have nicer pictures, but I think these are very, very important, that this exemplify the type of work that we do. And it is worth mentioning also that the team that Chris Nitch leads is mostly young undergrad students in environmental studies, mostly, that have become really good at doing the field work, but also become leaders within the volunteers, because they're the ones that teach them. They're the ones that make them feel comfortable, that make sure that they are collecting the data in the way that they should be doing. Also making sure that they're doing in a safe manner. So the engagement, and most of them are from the region or not far from El Yunque. So that brings another level of importance of connection with the community, that again, you see young professionals, young leaders leading this very important work. So would that answer your question?
Yes. Yes, it does. Melanie, you want to add on?
Yeah, I just wanted to add really quickly what Felípe just mentioned about the undergrad students. That's something that kind of brought out in my head when we were designing this process, because I was thinking, we really want to make this a learning experience from the bottom to the top. So why just don't bring people that are already interested in this topic, like undergraduates that are in environmental sciences, to bring this experience to the forest? So I think that's something really meaningful, that the people that is helping you throughout the citizen science process are people that are also growing and learning, not only the volunteers or the people that are interested in participating, but also the people that are actually in the field, that are getting all these strategies of, communicating with people, interpretation, but also how to measure the forest. So there's like learning spaces in the different parts of the planning process. And I hope in the future other citizen science program can incorporate that aspect of, just not only scientists, but bigger PIs, but just like including people who are just interested in that, growing professionally just by having volunteers and communicating with people. So I just wanted to add that was super cool. And I enjoy so much that we have amigos at Yunque working with us, because they have been outstanding training everyone, just their employees, undergraduate students, and the volunteers. And then Corazón Latino is just like giving cheers to everyone, like, yeah, that's basically how it goes. Corazón Latino is, yeah, you can do it. We're here for you. And then when you're doing the hard science, Corazón Latino is just like even the fun part of the process. So
that's fun. Felípe, that must warm your heart to hear.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we're good on the science, we're good on throwing parties. That's good for me.
So this leads me to my next question. And I have two questions from the audience that are basically the variations on the next two questions I want to ask you guys. So I'm going to start with transcreation. So Felipe, you used the word transcreation rather than translation.
That is
And
correct.
I think that knowing what that means, that it's more than just translating materials to make them fit a different language model, but it's culturally recreating materials. We've been able to hear that in your stories all the way through. What are the ways in which it's important to have fun and dance and bring food and communicate with imagery and bring things to where people are? But can you go a little deeper into that?
Sure.
Why is translation not just what you need to do if you want to get Latino people to show up at your event?
I'm going to put a slide because we do have a slide for that.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, I'm jumping back and forth, but here's a good example of bad translation. Google translation. I mean, obviously Google has been, and artificial intelligence has improved a lot, but you often see these type of examples out there, even in public lands, which is kind of embarrassing, but it happens, where there's a word-by-word translation. I mean, this is pre-Google Translate, the new generation, where it's really makes no sense. I mean, extreme caution, watch for eyes. The translation in on this will be the clock, extreme, be careful for the eyes. So means nothing really, like or the other. Please turn off your showers when you're done. Por favor, please. The supposedly translation is please come back. There's rain when you are done. So means nothing. So in a way, if this is a sign that it's in a public land, you will never allow, or a federal agency or a state agency or even a conservation organization will never allow to have a signage that has a typo or that has poor grammar in English. So why would you allow it in Spanish? So that's the reason. Like, it is not, Google Translate is not a strategy for diversity and inclusion. It's a tool that I have my doubts in using it. Or in the next step where we saw like, oh yes, we just hired an intern that happens to be Latino or Latina or Latinx, or and yes, that person's gonna do the translation, is gonna run our programs, and it's gonna be like our main engagement for the Latino community, which is great, and I welcome that opportunity. But that's also very challenging, because usually when that happens, it's like just one or two people that have to carry the weight of doing a whole program and for the Latino community, and it's not going to be enough. So we always advocate that if you are going to do this type of work, you really need to invest the resources, whether it's bringing on staff, whether it's bringing outside help, but do it right. And one of the things I want to commend you, ANS, is that you guys have really invested as an organization in bringing that diversity. And Serenela, Denise are examples of that. And I'm sure they even, there's probably, I believe there's more Latinos and from other communities of color. And even then that they're more than one, still they probably their demands for the time is very high. So, but that's the only way to do it. It's investing, and that means investing money, investing resources, having tough conversations. And when we are asked, and when we do this type of transcreation, again, it's not translation, we actually follow a methodology that actually the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, the CDC, NIH follow to create social marketing materials to communicate health messages to communities, to limited English proficiency communities. And it's a process where you have a multi-step process. Translation, yes, it's important. The word-by-word translation, it's important, but it's not the only part. So here's the cycle that we follow. And again, it's not that we invented it. We just took the best practices from those agencies, plus some expertise from the private practice, from traditional marketing and advertising that uses this type of methodology. So we first do an initial review. We receive either a flyer, whatever is the product. We review the language in English first, in the language that it was originally written, to see if if there needs to be some revisions, maybe the level of complexity of the words. I mean, we make initial revisions on the language, so we know what we're talking about. So for those who don't speak the language, that it's going to be that's going to be the end result, that understand what were the changes. Then after we make those changes, we do go through a translation. Then yeah, you send it to a professional translator, very important, somebody that has that expertise, that professional experience, formation, and skill sets to do it right. After the translator gets it back to you, then we do an additional revision to make sure that there's linguistic, grammatical, or any context revisions, because there is a difference if Serenela from Puerto Rico translate a document versus me coming from Mexico, or Denise, is Denise from Guatemala, I believe?
Denise is from Ecuador.
Ecuador, even different, or Colombia. So there's differences in, maybe we refer to renta in Spanish could be rent, or in Colombia it might be arriendo. And if you, an arriendo, that same word in a Mexican context will mean a different thing. So we want to make sure that we eliminate, or that we tailor that language to the target audience. If we're talking about diaspora in Puerto Rican diaspora in New York, it would be a very different use of language than a Mexican diaspora in California. So you need to make sure that you, or if it's going to be a national, in a national level, you try to minimize any regionalisms or any of those words that may create confusion. And then on top of that, we also look into the design. So are the colors okay? Do we have enough Latinos or people of color in the pictures? What are the type of considerations? And then with that, we generate the process. So as you can see, it's a complex process. It's time and resource intensive. So it is not a cheap process. Let us put it, and it's not one that even ourselves, that we are a Latino organization, we have people that are checking every step of the way to make sure, and even then sometimes we make mistakes. So how does that look like? Here's here's an example. Same project. It's a project that we're really proud of, from the River Network, a drinking water guide. We were able to make some changes and on the text, but actually the text was really good. And I don't know if my friend Paco from the he did a really good job in the language, in the English language. But when we were asked to transcreate it, we looked into the imagery, we look into the colors, we look into it. So same process, same thing, but it's meant to attract or to be welcoming to different communities. Would that answer, or did I went too much into the weeds?
No, I know. I certainly love seeing the two, the side by side. The differences are very subtle, and of course, it's not. This is why you bring professionals in.
Felipe.
Yeah.
There's a question that I think if you're able to help us to address it in the Q&A, that I wanted to read it to you.
Yes. Go ahead.
Mauricio asked, how do your engagement strategies address the multidimensionality within the diversity, just as Latino communities composed of multiple sub-ethnicities, even from a single Latin American country, different degrees of acculturation and adaptation, and general cultural markers.
Absolutely.
And also is in addition to social economic disparities. So I just wanted to point it out because I think it's really relevant.
That's a really great question. And really it's about understanding who your target audience is. It's really taking a deep dive into who you're trying to communicate. Again, if we're talking about the DC, Maryland, Virginia Latino community, we're talking about a community that's mostly Central American. So so we may not bring chalupas, which is a topical something that for food, but we bring pupusas, and we find the local vendor to provide the pupusas. We want to make sure that we are relevant in our cultural references, that the language resonates with that family. That doesn't mean that there's no Mexicans or Puerto Ricans or any other communities, but we usually go for what's the majority of the population. So for example, another example we're doing, work in Central Florida. Central Florida, I mean, a large diaspora from Puerto Rico. So although we may, our inclination with it's Florida, let's try a little bit of Cuban or Venezuelan. The reality is that particular demographic resonates much, what resonates is the Puerto Rican. So we bring the Puerto Rican perspective. So we ask either members of our staff or experts that can help us. Same thing in Puerto Rico, like I'm Mexican, I would call it arroz con frijoles, when it's arroz con habichuelas. So that difference is, and when we're talking about a national product, then we try to minimize the regionalism, and we try to, I mean, at the end of the day, the 70% of the Latino population in the US is Mexican, so we tend to go to that side. In terms of generational, so yes, there's obviously the older, the recent immigrants will prefer Spanish, so we communicate with them with Univision or Telemundo or La Opinión. Millennials, we probably want to do a combination. We want to use Remezcla, or we want to use other, and for the younger generations, we might even use everything in English. So it does depend on that. And it's really taking a deep dive on on who your target audience, understanding. It's not only like doing desks. Part of our process, for example, now that we're going to start doing with the Chesapeake Bay, it's doing the desk review, and we did it with Puerto Rico first. What's out there, what studies, what case, what research has been done, and then just taking a deep dive, just going there, meeting the people, talking. What is the media outlet that you prefer? What is the best tiendita? What's the best store that you prefer? And that's where we usually get the better insights to effectively and strategically reach our communities. So it is a long answer to saying we do a combination of both desk audit, desk research, and then really taking a deep dive into the community that we try to communicate with.
So that's great. And I'd like to follow up on another question that's in the Q&A box, which is, and the answer to this may be there is no answer, but two different people have asked questions that I would summarize as, what if you can't do all that? What if you are part of a small organization, a volunteer-based organization, you do community festivals, and you know that there are Latino people right in your community, and you'd like to, let's say, make that the events that you already do be welcoming to them. What can you do if you don't have the resources to make the kinds of investments you're describing that feel genuine, that feel welcoming, but you haven't been able to segment your audience and hire transcreation consultants and things like that?
Partnerships. Partner with those organizations that already have the trust, that already understand the community, and they may or may not have under their portfolio conservation or environmental issues, and just help them. And it is, I guarantee you that there's not a lot of organizations that would say, no, we don't want to deal with that. It's part because they understand that it is part of what appeals to the Latino community. So what I would do is definitely partner, there's anywhere from immigrant rights groups to libraries. For example, a couple of months ago, I was doing those scoping and scouting for Wyoming because of all in Jackson Hole. There's because of a lot of hotels and resorts, 30% of the population there is Latino, and the Forest Service and the Park Service have Grand Teton and other and those public lands, and they're lacking a meaningful engagement with Latino communities. So we went there, attending a conference, spoke to some of the leadership there and said, like, we're interested in exploring ways. So what did I do? Well, go to the local library, see where the bilingual section is, talk to the person that is in charge of that program, and say, like, hey, we have a limited English proficiency or English as a second language program. We have aftercare here for Latino communities. There's this great tiendita that sells really good Mexican food. So that's where you want to find those synergies, because they know and they will guide you. And again, it's that shared resources, and knowing that you're not going to be the only organization. You cannot solve everybody's problems. So just find those partnerships, be genuine, be patient in those partnerships. And yeah, and just, again, it might not investment in resources, but invest in building that trust, because a lot of organizations will be very weary. They come like when there's election time or when there's census time, they always like come like, oh, we want to partner with you, but then what's in the long run for me?
And I just wanted to add really quickly, in a very humble and uninformal opinion about this. I would just say, even before that, just building relationship is super important. So acknowledging that there's like an informal process that you can actually take advantage of, for example, just doing small activities or small parties or small study groups or conversations in your house, inviting people that are just interested, that you're interested in Latin American people and Hispanic people, just creating a safe space for people to engage is super important for starting that conversation in other areas. So I just wanted to share that we really need to acknowledge that there's some uninformal spaces that we can actually use in our houses or movie theaters or something that builds that conversation and relationships.
I want to just say that what you've just described is the process I would call make a friend.
That's it. Actually, one of the things that we recommend for organizations that are looking into entering or exploring partnerships, it's go to a Cinco de Mayo or a Hispanic Heritage Month or a celebration. Obviously, right now everything is on hold, but there's always an opportunity that all the Latino organizations will be there, a health clinic, and just introduce yourself, see who's out there, attend, or if you were able to get a booth. It's sometimes not even to serve the community at that point, it's just to meet other organizations within your local area that are serving communities, Latino or other communities of color. So I think that's true. And again, it takes some investment. For example, in our work, and I'm gonna give away one of our secrets, that first link to the community, especially the Cheverly, was Abel. I live in downtown Washington, D.C. I have a completely different relationships within the community. So Abel already established trusted leader in Cheverly. So for him, it was not as complicated to just invite the people that he's been friends with for a long time. And that, again, builds trust. So that's how we were able to get 50, to have an attendance of 50 individuals in our first event with some Facebook advertising. It's just finding those trusted members of the community that can open the doors and be genuine and make friends, as you say.
I have two more questions in our remaining, I would say, 6 or 7 minutes before we close right on time with a little closing. So I'll tell you what the two questions are so you can decide what order to answer them. The first is one of the last ones that we gave in our material describing the talk, which is, so let's say that you have, you're an environmental organization, a traditionally mainstream environmental organization, and you've hired someone, a wonderful Latina person. How do you transcend tokenism and make sure that that person is set up for success? Or rather, not even the person on staff. How do you, when you're welcoming people in to your programming, how do you ensure that they don't feel like they're sort of token members of your community, but rather full ones? And just to make sure you can choose what order to answer, because we'll probably run out of time on the second one. The second question is, for the next year, at least, it's going to be really hard to meet people at community events. It could be longer. And this is selfishly, ANS, we have recently been working really hard on engaging with Latino communities in person, at the stream, in nature, in conferences. What do we do now when so much of what has been successful and so much of what is traditionally recommended for being successful is to meet people in person and where they are? What are your thoughts on going online, and what are your thoughts on engagement and tokenism?
Let me start with the tough one, having staff members. And I think the most important thing is really empowering that person. it is making sure that that person can, and it's investing in that person's recommendations. And that person may say, hey, we need to engage in this particular festival, or we need to hire a consultant to help us translate, because, and really empowering, giving that person resources, because without resources, it's just gonna end up being good intentions. And the second thing that I think it's important, it's there's really interesting networks like Green Latinos, and in the past Voices. There's groups that really trying to be, and the space that you created with Naturally Latinos, that's what we need to encourage, and have them share experiences, have them attend conferences, get them to go to conferences. Like, for example, in the Sustainable Urban Forestry Coalition, we were the first and so far the only organization that has a Latino representation, or that focuses on Latinos. There's a lot of spaces in the conservation work, that need our voices, that need to be. I was in early January at the outdoor industry conference, and again, not a lot of diversity in all the rooms. So have them go. If they can speak, great. If they can just attend, it's networking, it's finding, it's ideas, it's sharing those experiences. So it's really about investing in that individual or individuals that it comes. Again, don't make the mistake of like, oh, this person will solve all our problems. No, that person needs support. That person needs connections. That needs the backing of the organization. And sometimes those will take tough conversations. Sometimes that person will say, hey, you're doing this wrong. And you just have to be open to that, because diversity and inclusion, it's a painful process. There's no sugarcoating. There's no saying it. It is a painful process. You just need to be ready. And again, it doesn't come as a decree, or because the board said it, or because now we receive a funding to do it. No, it's a painful, and organizations like you, like ANS, that really invest, it's the ones that become successful. To your second question, I think online is it's a beautiful opportunity to evolve the work that we all do, and we encounter the same issues. So early on the pandemic, we talked to our funders and say, hey, we're gonna have to go back to our roots, which is online connections. We're gonna test, we're gonna make mistakes, we're gonna do things. But one thing that we know is that Latino communities are connected. It might not be through a Mac or a computer, it might be through their phones. So we need to utilize that opportunity. And now more than ever, we need to remind folks that connecting with nature is very important. It's part of their well-being as an individual, as a family, and as a community. So I think we have great opportunities, and we can have a whole hour just chatting about what we've done and what we've learned in this time. But our engagement, where we have tested, we brought a little bit of health and nature. We brought health experts to explain what coronavirus was, but also what can you do to boost your immune system by connecting with nature. So we stayed true to our mission, but responding to the challenging times. We're actually organizing events like concerts. We had a Cinco de Mayo concert, and we have had concerts with Latino performers or with performers, and we still continue to present an online concert, basically, to send the conservation and environmental message. And our numbers have gone to the roof. We are now reaching more than 1.5 million individuals every week. We have our videos, our concerts have got 30, 50, 160,000 views. And in every one of them, we try to continue to communicate our conservation and environmental messages. Even for Saturday, which we're gonna have a Mother's Day event, which this time coincides Mother's Day in Mexico and in the US on May 10th. We're gonna have a performer from Mexico playing the guitar, doing poetry, but it's going to be focused on Mother Earth. It's celebrating the Mother's Day, but honoring Mother Earth. So we are finding ways, and we're inserting all the messaging about protecting our Madre Tierra. So we just need to be creative. We just need to be ready to. Another thing that I will share, if you go to our webpage, corazonlatino.us, we actually created an app where we have a psychiatrist and healthcare professional in Puerto Rico that it's also a forest therapy guide. So she created a 10-step a meditation process, and we did it. We put a imagery of forests, of plants, of flowers with the sounds of a Yunque National Forest. So it's a beautiful. So just we need to be creative. We need to find nature is needed more than ever. Obviously, our events won't be able to have more than 10 people. We'll have to wear masks. We'll have to have sanitizers. Before our success looked like having 50 people or 100 people. Now we cannot have more than 10. So we'll just have to figure out ways to still encourage connection with nature while we have to deal with with these new norms.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Felípe, and thank you, Melanie, and thank you everyone for coming and joining us. One plug I want to make to everyone today is that we are going through that process that Felípe just described right now for our Naturally Latinos conference, and we'll be sending out soon a request for people to join our planning committee to help us figure out how to do this, how to engage our DC-based environmental Latino community in this next year in the time of COVID. So because you've registered for tonight's talk, you'll be getting an email from either me or Serenella inviting you to apply to be on our planning committee. So if you have thoughts, I'm going to take this opportunity to make the pitch that we'd love to have your help. I guess the other thing I'd like to do is, Melanie, ask you if there's any last closing thoughts you'd like to give, and then I will wrap us up.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah, I just wanted to resonate with Felípe and thinking about the first question of how you can involve more Latinos in this leadership process and also in different organizations. I think it needs to be redesigned the way you involve people in the leadership process. So thinking about, first, you need to read about Latinos. That's something super important. So I always suggest to people to read and watch videos and see movies that you can relate to what you're actually experiencing, and just blur the boundaries of differences. So if you are able to to make people feel comfortable in their environment, you're already succeeding. So just giving the opportunity to be part of that design process of your leadership, but at the same time, just understanding their context and reading about their culture. It will make them feel more comfortable when you're reaching to the Latino people. So that's something that I wanted to share. And I'm really excited, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you everyone for participating. I always love working with Felípe and all of you. And if you want to follow up with a conversation, you can write me on my email. I think I will be able to write it down and follow my Facebook or anything else, but just thank you for the opportunity. And I think these conversations are really important because we know we're having more Latino community in United States and different parts of the world that want to be part of leadership and take action. So that's what I wanted to share.
So thank you both again so much.
Eliza, one last thought.
Oh,
one last
go
thing.
ahead.
Hug a tree.
Go ahead.
Hug a tree.
Hug a tree.
That's all you need to do. There's no social distancing with trees. That will be my final. Please go out and hug a tree. If you can now, go do it now, not tomorrow morning. That's all.
That's a great tip. I will hug a tree tomorrow morning myself. So thank you both so much, and thank you everyone for coming. What I have up on the screen is our contact information. We'd love to hear from you, and thank you again. We will be announcing follow-up conservation cafes soon. We normally take the summer off for conservation cafes, and Audubon Naturalist Society is actually going to be launching a new series in which, rather than speaking with conservation professionals, which has been the focus of Conservation Cafe, we're going to be speaking with naturalists and bringing some of the incredible depth of natural history knowledge that we have amongst our instructors and staff and trip leaders to the broader community. So stay tuned. We'll be announcing those soon, and they'll be sort of similar in format, in that it'll be an expert presenter sharing. People will be able to interact with them in a variety of ways. It'll be online, of course, and they'll be at different times. They won't be just in the evenings. So we will also be, of course, evaluating conservation cafes. Possibly they'll be online for a lot longer. So those of you who are like Dixie, who chatted earlier, in the Northern Virginia area and have never come up to Woodend for a conservation cafe before, I predict you'll be able to attend some more this year, because we'll continue to be online for a while, possibly as a supplementary option to in person. And I will say that when I think about accessibility to all sorts of audiences, that's one thing that I think we can take from this. I'm hopeful that we can continue to offer these types of events, even when we return to being able to have them in person as a primary venue, that we can do more live streaming. I think that the accessibility and bringing people from, honestly, from around the country to this event is just really powerful. And for example, having Melanie be able to join us when, I'm sorry, we would not have been able to fly you to Washington for this conservation cafe. It's great that we could have you. So thank you both again. Thank you, everyone. Stay healthy, and happy Mother Earth Day soon.
Thank you. Big virtual hug. Bye.
Good night. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.